Hi there, my name is Philip Ideson. I want to welcome you to the Art of Procurement podcast, the podcast that helps you, a forward-thinking procurement professional, position yourself and your team to proactively take advantage of the revolution that's taking place in procurement today. By interviewing industry trailblazers and sharing insights from our own experiences, my team and I pull back the curtain and shine a light on the strategies, tactics, and tools that procurement teams are using to elevate their impact. And today on the show, I'm pleased to welcome Joël Collin-Demers. Joël is the founder of Pure Procurement and former lead of IBM Canada's SAP practice. He focuses on helping clients drive digital transformation and has a deep knowledge of the procure tech world, from the largest suite provider to the smallest niche targeted solution. You may also have heard of the Procure Tech Cup, which he launched and hosts to shine a light on the many tech providers in our space. And we had a wide-ranging discussion, including the IT procurement relationship, building tech roadmaps, integration challenges, change management, and the current tech landscape. So, with that said, let's go into the conversation where I started by asking Joël if he found procurement or if procurement found him.
That's a funny story, actually, because I come from an IT background, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I did my bachelor in business and administration with a specialization in MIS, Management Information Systems, and started implementing SAP MM coming out of school, right? So started at IBM Canada, started implementing SAP MM with our industrial clients, did an SAP certification, and was really coming at it from an IT background, right? How do you software development lifecycle? How do you manage the deployment of applications and the design of applications, and then applying that to the SAP space. In 2012, SAP bought Ariba as well. So I was kind of designated to the SAP MM, Materials Management module, which supports purchasing processes. And when they bought Ariba, when SAP bought Ariba in 2012, started developing that practice within our SAP practice. And so did the first implementations of sourcing and contract management and supplier lifecycle management, or information management at the time. And kind of grew from there, right? Where I was going like, oh, okay, this is a domain of expertise of processes, because I always come at it from the business process lens that makes sense to me, that come to me easily. And then I had that IT skill from it as well. So I did a certificate in strategic procurement to kind of layer on top of that. And that's really where I sit now, at the intersection of both those things, right? IT and procurement.
Then you're involved in a lot of digital transformations, and the supplier landscape well. You say you come from that kind of SAP background, but obviously you're involved in transformations that involve a lot more technology than that today. And so I want to talk a little bit about digitization and and how we should be thinking about it, not necessarily from a transformation perspective, but kind of looking at continuous improvement. The first thing that I think about is roadmaps, and what's the vision and what's the roadmap that an organization, a procurement organization, has for digitization. And I wonder if you could just share about what do you see on the ground. Do most procurement orgs have a defined tech roadmap? If they don't, should they?
I think they should, first off, and I don't think a lot of procurement orgs have a really explicit one. Mm-hmm. And often it'll be, IT driven, in the sense where you're getting pushed an ERP migration or an ERP upgrade, or, sometimes you'll have your little gadgets that you want, right? That you need to function. So for me, the first thing, if you're a CPO, digitally minded CPO, you're coming into an organization, the first thing you're going to want is a spend cube if you don't already have one, right? Because you want to know where your spend is across business units, categories, etc. So that's usually where I think people start, right? And then when you look at the spend, where are the opportunities, and then where the opportunities for savings or continuous improvement are, that's where you're going to start deploying initiatives. But I would even take a step back for that, right? And say, how do we link that to the company's overall objectives, right? Its mission, its vision, and then how do we decompose that into our procurement objectives, right? Is it innovation based? Is it really spend under management based? Is it savings that you're after, et cetera? And then, so those are your objectives. What are the capabilities, or the strategies and the capabilities that you're going to have to develop to execute on those strategies to reach those objectives, right? And so really breaking that down into, okay, I could try to source, I could throw people at a sourcing problem and have and run 100 sourcing events, or I could try to have the same amount of people I have today, but give them technology and have them be much more productive, right? And so those are two different strategies. And so if I want to do the second one, what capabilities do I need? Well, I need to be able to have one person run 50 sourcing events in a year with the context of our business, right? And so that's how I would kind of think about it is, what are the objectives? What are the strategies that we're going to execute on from a business standpoint, right? And leveraging technology that'll give you the capabilities that you need. And then you can seek out the actual pieces of tech and how that fits into your overall company's IT architecture and what's available on the market. You bring all that to a head in terms of sequencing that in your roadmap, right? Based on where are the biggest benefit items.
Now, if there's an organization that has an ERP, but they don't have anything downstream from a procurement perspective, do you focus on downstream first and then go? So when I mean downstream, it's P2P before then going upstream and looking, and that's really more the strategic, getting your arms around spend strategically, starting with your spend cube and then kind of going from there. What do you recommend that folks do?
Yeah, well, I mean, pain. So it's all about giving you capacity and solving pain, so that you can generate capacity to then address the highest ticket business case items, right? So it's really contextual, but often, you want to have at least that base P2P process where you're able at least to at the very, very least process invoices with approvals on them before payment, right? That's the bare bones. And then if you're able to bring that forward into requisitioning, approvals, pre-spend, right? Pre-service delivery or goods delivery by suppliers, having at least a rudimentary procure to pay process so that as your company grows, or depending on the size as well, right? You're less in firefighting mode and trying to find where stuff is and just keeping the lights on in operations, and you're able to shift higher into that tactical and strategic view of procurement, right? And then looking at that spend cube, looking at the opportunities from a category management standpoint, starting to develop, category management practices or even roles within your team for specific categories where you've got a lot of spend that can be actively managed, right? Putting in place corporate contract, preferred suppliers, or just generating marketplaces, right? Where you're getting quotes at the P2P level before going out to a supplier, getting quotes continuously before going and engaging with a vendor, right? So I'm throwing a couple different concepts your way, but I think for me, it's really that spend cube, that visibility into spend is one of the first things I'll want to do. If before being able to do that, you need to stabilize the operations, right? From a procurement or purchasing standpoint or P2P, to be able to give you capacity to do that and do that. But then when you've got your spend cube, looking at it and mining the opportunities is what's going to direct you on. Does it make more sense to create new purchasing channels and procure to pay dedicated for services and goods, for example, right? Or is it more, okay, we really need to start generating more capacity and capabilities around sourcing, around supplier management to mitigate risk, right? So it's really based on the drivers that tie back to your company objectives.
Yeah, understanding what you spend, obviously critical to them figuring out what's the best buying channels based on where the majority of the volume are, and as you say, the pain points that some of the users have. Now, you talked about coming from an IT background before coming into procurement. From a tech roadmap, it's easy but also dangerous, I think, to build a roadmap in the silo of procurement itself. But oftentimes, IT folks may not truly understand kind of what the nuances within procurement are that may differ from other parts of the business that they've supported. How, as a procurement person, can you kind of bridge that and make sure that you're working with IT, but making the case for items on that tech roadmap that may be unfamiliar to the person that's in IT that's been charged with overseeing the support for you in terms of your procure tech implementations?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? And I think you're absolutely on the mark there in terms of don't do it in a silo. So it's really developing that partnership, right, between IT and procurement, because to your point, right, if we flip it around, procurement may not understand certain constraints, right, or things that need to be done from an architecture standpoint, upgrading the middleware, right? Like to be able to enable a roadmap and a vision. So I think really getting intimate with IT, right, where you have an IT business partner dedicated for for procurement, or a business process expert, or however you want to call them, right? That's your main point of contact as the digital procurement lead, right? Whether you're the CPO and that's your subtitle or your sub role as well, or you've got somebody that's dedicated to that. And then I would add another stakeholder there, which is the rest of the business, right? So you want to create user communities where you're able to train folks on how to use the systems properly, but also gather their feedback on what are the pain points, what are the things that are taking you the most time today, where are the opportunities that they see in terms of improving supplier service or good quality, right? Or even the productivity at the business unit level, right? So having a user community and then having a prioritization committee, right? Where you and IT, procurement and IT are sitting there, but you also have representatives from your business unit. And then that's kind of a cycle, right? Where your user community pushes stuff out to you or brings stuff to you that are opportunities. You also have a vision as procurement of the wider opportunities or the global opportunities. Yeah. Those come to a head in your prioritization committee, and together with the business, like you discuss and you get behind a prioritization or a roadmap, a sequential development of ideas, and the IT constraints come up, the procurement strategy and objectives and why we need to invest in certain places first comes up, and the business's perspective comes up, right? And then you craft a global vision, and then you're able to execute on it, right? So that's kind of, and I would add, you cultivate that kind of a business case culture as well, right? In that cycle where you're able to say, okay, well, what's going to get the greatest benefit for our company as a whole, not just, you yourself and you.
Yeah, but that's frustrating sometimes because you're all gung-ho on wanting to put in place a strategy that is going to help your procurement team. But there are some bigger factors at play. And you talked about IT and IT constraints. What are some of the IT constraints that may exist that we don't necessarily have line of sight into?
Yeah, so I alluded to one earlier around like middleware, right? Mm-hmm. But like everything that's integration between systems. So as you craft a procure tech roadmap, and the market has exploded over these past 5-6 years, where we've got over 400 solutions or 600, depending on how you want to look at it and define it, that serve procurement, right? And so, a decade, 15 years back, you had maybe 12, right? So integration is inevitable if you're going to want to leverage some of those capabilities developed in these different procure tech solutions in your organization. And so integration considerations become very important from an IT standpoint, right? If I don't have native integration, I need to develop it. If I need to develop it, I'm going to do it on a corporate tool or a procurement specific tool. Upgrades and technical patches to be able to have the prerequisites to be able to communicate with something else. That's the big one that always comes up. And then it's just, from a support standpoint, right? Operationally, like if we add new pieces to the equation, new puzzle pieces, I need people that understand those puzzle pieces from a technical standpoint, and they're able to help users troubleshoot login issues, functional issues in the platform as well, right? So depending on what the roles and responsibilities are with your IT, there's also a capacity issue and saying, okay, like if we add a piece, right, I need a new parent in my family.
Yeah. There's been an explosion. You talked about explosion in providers in the procure tech space, but there's also been a lot more no code or low code solutions. Do they scare IT, or what's IT's general perspective of low code and no code? Because I can see, from a user perspective, it's very beneficial. You can test easily, you can experiment, you can do proof of concepts. You don't necessarily need to rely on the depth of implementation that you needed before. But on the IT side, you've got somebody making changes that the IT may not feel is qualified to make changes. How do you balance that?
And again, I think it's having that relationship together, right? And that building that trust over time, because to your point, these low code, no code solutions are essentially a blank canvas. Mm-hmm. And then we give users the paintbrush, right? And so if they don't know what a proof of concept is, if they don't have any basis of the deployment and the software development lifecycle, right? Like you design, you build, you test, you deploy, right? If they're changing stuff directly in prod, mm-hmm. right? Like that's stuff that scares IT, right? So I think it's building that maturity in procurement where You're able to, version control and put governance in place around how are we going to manage business processes through a low-code, no-code tool, right? And so that's, I think, the key to getting the value from these new intake and orchestration solutions, right? Because you can paint by numbers with templates, but then you may paint outside the lines. You can paint stick figures or you can paint Mona Lisas, and you want to work with IT to get to the Mona Lisa stage as fast as possible. Mm-hmm. But that means you need to understand IT better, and they need to understand procurement better. They're for it from a theoretical standpoint, right? To say, oh, okay, I don't need to add new members to my family. You're going to take care of it on the procurement side. That's great. It increases velocity and increases visibility and understanding. And it makes you more autonomous directly as the subject matter expert, right? So I think they're there from a potential standpoint, but then it's just when rubber hits the road and we put governance in place, like maybe having IT,
right?
Your IT business partner there to keep the guardrails on from whether you're deploying an application or a business process, the life cycle is the same, right? So leveraging IT for that skill set is something that you can do as well to build that trust, to keep them involved, and to identify as well other constraints or dependencies that you may not be seeing when you're trying to administer those types of tools.
Now, it's interesting as we look at how the market for procure tech has changed over the last few years. You talked there about the explosion in the number of providers in the marketplace, and a lot of those start as being point solutions and then try to evolve over time to add on additional capabilities. Have you seen any changes in the trends of, because it seems to be a pendulum that always swings about, I'm going to look at a suite versus I'm going to look at a point solution. And then everyone's looking at point solutions. Then it swings back to, that got really complicated. We're going to go back to what is, quote unquote, easier and buy a suite. Where are we in the market right now in terms of that pendulum?
Yeah, and I think we see there's everything, right? There's everything out there, which is, it's great because it flips the winning strategy in my mind as a customer, as a client of these solutions. It's less about doing a full market analysis and being able to say, what can the market do for me? And it's more saying, here's what I want to do. Can you do it for me? Yeah. And you'll find the answer that you're looking for on the market, right? And then from a procure tech firm standpoint, I think to me it's also a strategic decision, right? It's saying, do I want to go niche in a vertical of a sub process within procurement and go deep and be the very best, like the tip of the spear in terms of innovation, which I see with some firms, and that's what gets me most excited about pure play solutions. And then you've got the other approach where it's going, okay, well, we're gonna evolve horizontally across the whole procurement value chain based on our key accounts and our customers and how they mature with our solution as well, which is another strategy as well, right? I don't think there's a right one or a wrong one, but the one that gets me most excited as a practitioner, as an implementer, as somebody who chases innovation and value, it's those tip of the spear companies where I have my base. I may have an SAP or Oracle or Jetty Edwards backend ERP for my purchasing. I may even have a suite for certain modules of everything that can't be done in my ERP. But then if I want to, deploy a strategy to reach an objective that's based on tip of the spear innovation in procure tech, like we have the ability to do that, right? Very, very well today. And there's a big offering for that. So I think that answers your question. I kind of got it carried away there, but
it leads to an interesting follow-up, because I wanted to really segue into, setting the procurement organization themselves, setting themselves up for success to take advantage of the opportunities that technology creates. And you talk about the different kind of opportunities of suite versus a best of breed. And, even the suites, most of the times clients will come in using one module or two modules and then expand from there. I think very rarely does somebody go and buy a suite off the shelf and start deploying everything at the same time. I think those days are gone. But when I think about all the complexity that does exist, how that can seem overwhelming, I think, for a number of procurement leaders. How can they be thinking about kind of managing that complexity within their own team to make sure that they're making decisions that they can have confidence in, and not just waiting and waiting and waiting for the next innovation, or not being afraid to start because, there are so many different options to choose from?
That's a great question. And it kind of goes back to the whole topic of the conversation, right? Like focusing on continuous improvement instead of a transformation, because to me, a transformation is that it's huge scope, like huge budget, overwhelming. We're starting at 0. We're going to get to 4 in 3 years, right? From a maturity standpoint. And then it's going to be over and we're going to be like this new glorious procurement organization.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the wrong way to go about it because it introduces complexity, cost, risk, et cetera, being overwhelmed. I think very brass tacks, right? You can start an Excel file with your team like today where you have 6 columns, right? The subject, the context for that subject, the priority, the owner, and the status, and then a column for notes, right? And then put the continuous improvement train into motion, right? And just start there, right? You'll start listing stuff up. We need to improve our sourcing process.
Yeah.
We'd like to put a sourcing application in place. Okay, let's build a business case, give it to somebody specific, right? And start just doing that, right? Just being mindful and purposeful about your continuous improvement and your education around what the art of the possible is in each of those procurement sub-processes, right? So I always go back to spend analysis, category management, leads into sourcing, leads into contract management, that leads into procure to pay with your requisitioning, catalog management, approvals, goods receipts, invoicing, and payment, and then your supplier relationship management, which is, how do I measure performance? How do I onboard suppliers and deal with diversity data? And then how do I interact with them from a transactional perspective on portals and networks, right? So to me, if you're starting to look at those different dimensions, you look at your spend cube, you identify opportunities, you put them in that Excel file, and you're meeting every week to look at, okay, how can we push the ball further right now, right? You'll get a good sense for, okay, where is the complexity? Where is the quick wins? And then it's going and getting external help to help you validate that, right? When you've got a sufficient level of literacy and maturity and understanding of your own environment, going to someone like myself or another consulting firm, niche consulting firm that knows ProcureTech and the ProcureTech market well, and just say, hey, here's where we're at, and can you help us, confirm or infirm our assumptions? And then just doing that small exercise will get you to another level in terms of the vision, right? You don't want 200 slides, right? Like a roadmap should be able to hold on 10 slides, right? Max. And you should be able to present a one slider that has everything on there, at least for the next, 3 to 5 to 7 years. And then, you just keep, somebody needs to wake up and go to bed every day thinking about your digital procurement roadmap and how you keep pushing the ball forward.
But is that usually, as a team is staffed, is that the CPO is doing that? Is that, the head of digital procurement transformation? I mean, I know it's going to differ based on sizes of organizations, but who is the person that should be waking up thinking about the digitization of the procurement function?
So I think absolutely your CPO needs to have that mindset, needs to be digitally minded. And then to your point, depending on the size of the organization, do they have time to do it themselves on a half a day a week type thing? Or, if they've got the budget, the size of the organization to justify giving that to a resource, a senior category manager, maybe it's an IT category manager that has that background dealing with technology, or somebody that's got a dedicated role for that, right? If your organization is to the point to the size that it makes sense, right? And or getting a fractional digital procurement person from the outside to come and help you with that as well, right? So I think there's a number of different models and sizes and shapes that you can adapt this to based on, where you're at in your maturity and what kind of constraints you have from a budget standpoint, and even potentially timeline if you have, an ERP migration or all these other technology projects that can get pushed our way because of organizational priorities. So I think it's just making sure, just starting, right? Just getting that ball in motion is the.
You talked about just starting. I'm thinking about there's a number of organizations that don't really have that much of a tech stack still today, and they're thinking about where to start. We talked about some of the solution categories that they can start with, but something that I always encourage folks, and I'd love your perspective on this, is that you don't necessarily need to start on year one with what your vision is for the technology capability in year three, but start with something that then demonstrates the art of the possible. So then that drives additional investment into either a different solution altogether in 3 years' time that's more mature, for example, or start small with the solution you can grow into, but you don't need to buy everything at once.
Or even a process optimization project, right? Like I come at things from a business process management background, and I think business process management has a lot to teach procurement about transformation, because an application is just something to support a business process, right? So just getting your hands around like, what's our business process hierarchy? What are the different processes that people are executing without necessarily having to model them in Visio, and get super extensive, but just having that hierarchy and that overall vision of, based on those pillars I was mentioning earlier, spend analysis to SRM, right? What are we doing today? What are we not doing that we could be doing if we had more capacity? Where's the value lie? And then if you look at it from that standpoint, that also can be a one slider, right? It's going to inform you in terms of, okay, in our continuous improvement cycle cadence, right? What should we be looking at, right? And exploring in terms of potential business cases.
Now, as you reflect on all the different, improvement projects that you've been a part of, what are the most common mistakes that you see that companies make when they're thinking about, what their procurement roadmap should look like, where they are prioritizing, any kind of common challenges, struggles, or landmines that you would encourage people to stay away from?
Yeah, and strangely, it's a great question, because strangely, it's always the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. It's always overestimating our organization's capacity to adopt change, right? So for me, you're going to think, and that's why I go back to, I don't like the word transformation really, even though it is transformation, but one drop in the bucket at a time. And so really being in tune with your user community, being in tune with your business's priorities, and then when you roll things out, right, bringing folks through the change management ADKAR framework. So that's another dimension of skill sets that you could develop in procurement, is sending folks to ProSci, change management, or any other change management certification or methodology. And I like ADKAR because it's the 5 letters that everybody needs to go through to be able to adopt the change and carry it out successfully. So it's awareness. They need to be aware of the change. Desire. They need to want to change, see the value behind changing. Awareness, desire, knowledge, ability. So they need both the knowledge, but also the ability to actually execute on that knowledge, and then reinforcement, which is the last piece. So being able to come back and reinforce that knowledge, right? Make sure that you can't just be trained once and adopt a high performing standard for yourself in a new discipline or in a new system or in a new process, right? We need to come back and bump that knowledge and ability up again, right? And that's just the science of learning for humans in general. So bringing those principles into process and technology deployment in our organizations is something that is lacking from most places where I've been. And it's also the key to success, right? If you're able to focus on something that's, the smallest viable scope, right? We often talk about the MVP, minimum viable product, but I challenge you to think about the minimum viable scope for a business case for a procure tech in your organization. Do that, right? 1 business unit, 7 users, but they're generating a crazy amount of spend. Like, let's start with them. That sounds great to me.
Why do you think we always, well, I say always, that's not fair, but oftentimes we underinvest in change management, as you talked about there, about that being often, a big cause of failure. Why is that often not a part of a business case, or not a big enough part of a business case?
Yeah, I think it is. And we all launch with good intentions of doing the change properly. But having change management, dedicated change management expertise is expensive in a budget line item, right? And as soon as, there starts to be delays or complications or constraints, we focus on getting the tech out. And those are the first types of things where you're going like, oh, we can actually scratch this without affecting the timeline and staying in budget, et cetera. So I think it's just a function of the fact that it's soft. It's a soft skill. Yes, there are hard deliverables and there are hard methodologies and approaches to be able to do it, but I just mean that there's no like if there's no change management, the system still goes live, right? So we could still say we've achieved the objective. But unless you're putting in place KPIs and measuring those KPIs from an adoption standpoint and how they tie into your business case benefits, and then, on the go live date is actually when the project really begins. Mm-hmm. That's where you have to look at those indicators and start figuring out if you're realizing that business value. Like, I think that's part of the solution, right? It's thinking of a project scope much wider than we traditionally do it in the software development lifecycle, right? With the IT mindset.
Yeah, you think so many times when you go in and look at tech implementations that didn't work, but it's, where it went live on day one and everyone left it, and then 3 years later, you look back and say this didn't generate the returns that we were sold on, and the business case was faulty, or whatever it is. Things that could probably been fixed or changed a lot sooner than 3 years into a program, but things get left to kind of set and forget, and that's why you don't often get the return that you had in some of these bigger programmatic. When you think about those big, we're going to do everything in 4 years kind of transformations, where they often go off course. I want to wrap up by just talking a little bit about the trophy that you have in the background behind you. For anyone who's listening, you have the Procure Tech Cup behind you, which I'm sure that a lot of our listeners have seen or heard about on LinkedIn as just a little fun, not really even a competition. I think it's more of an educational kind of event to help bring together procurement technology firms and just explain what they can do and what their capabilities are and what their business cases and use cases are, and get that in front of more people. You obviously talk to a lot of procurement technology companies through the Procure Tech Cup and just in your day-to-day conversations with folk and day-to-day work. I'm really interested to know kind of what are you most excited about when you look out at all the different providers that you see, and not necessarily naming names for a provider, but it's more from a technological perspective and the impact that could have on procurement.
Yeah, and I alluded to it earlier, right? And just to give a bit more detail on the Procure Tech Cup, it's really that. It's a celebration of the power of procurement technology, and it's bringing procurement professionals, digitally minded procurement professionals that want to get exposed to the art of the possible with people creating that art of the possible, right? The Procure Tech providers. And it's all around try to put your market research on autopilot as a procurement professional, and having fun along the way, right? Like some witty, quick, some banter, some fun, teasing different providers, etc., and just not taking ourselves too seriously while doing serious things, right? So that's on the Procure Tech Cup front. And I had a ridiculously oversized trophy manufactured because that's the spirit of the event. Mm-hmm. And to answer your question more directly, it's the innovation, right? Which I alluded to earlier, the tip of the spear stuff, where we see the art of the possible rising to a whole other level in each of those verticals, whether it's spend analysis, like having default dashboards and feeding into category strategies with automatic insights based on, having visibility into that on the technology side, and the power of, or all the way to catalog management and really flipping the paradigm in terms of getting access to catalog data, enabling comparison and creating marketplaces within your own business with your own suppliers, to everything that's going on the supplier data side, right? Being able to create a golden vendor master record that anybody could kind of come download from anywhere in the world, right?
You actually trust it.
Sorry?
You actually trust it.
Yeah, exactly. So there's all these, I think procurement processes, they're fairly mature. We know what the best practices are, but then it's just bringing technology to realize the vision of what we all already know as senior procurement practitioners, right? So I think that's, to me, we're not going to change procurement. We're going to just get ourselves to another level in terms of our ability to execute on what we already know.
There's less about something that comes in from left field that we have no idea that, completely transforms the way we think about procurement, and more about how can we do procurement better, more effectively, more efficiently, more accurately, with more consistency in the data, and all the things that we've lamented for a long time that, we wish that we could do. it's having the opportunity to do those things.
And that we will keep lamenting for the next, forever. But we, when we lament, we lament.
The baseline has increased.
That's right. Exactly right.
Well, Joe, I want to thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast. The last question that I always ask and always say is the easy one, is if listeners would like to reach out to you directly, where are the best places for them to find you?
Yeah, sure. So there's two spots, really. There's on LinkedIn. So my personal profile, joelcollin-demers.com. Joël Collin-Demers on LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. And then, it's a newsletter. So the Pure Procurement newsletter, so newsletter.pureprocurement.ca. So every week I send out a newsletter on trends, ideas, best practices, everything that's going on in the procure tech space that I'm seeing. I push out the content from the Procure Tech Cup there as well. So it's really like I try to make it a one-stop shop to keep yourself abreast on digital literacy in the procurement technology space.
Yeah. And I get that email every Sunday night. I think it hits the inboxes. So I encourage anybody to check that out. We'll put links to your LinkedIn profile and to your website and the newsletter in the show notes for today's episode. So that's going to be artofprocurement.com/podcast. That's artofprocurement.com/podcast. Joe, one last time, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. If this episode struck a chord with you, please do send it to somebody. We grow here at Art of Procurement through word of mouth, and that would be really appreciated. You can also support us by giving us a thumbs up, a star rating, or a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Since 2015, we've built the world's largest free resource for procurement professionals looking to elevate their impact. Our resources span podcasts like this, videos, blog posts, papers, and events. To join us on the inside and to ensure you never miss an episode, a webinar, event, or a post, please do subscribe to our weekly newsletter, This Week in Procurement. You can do that at artofprocurement.com/subscribe. That's artofprocurement.com/subscribe. Thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.